the reclusive hedge fund billionaire who's the secret power behind Donald Trump. For that, we turn to Jane Mayer. She's a staff writer for The New Yorker and author of several award-winning and best-selling books. Her latest, Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right, was named one of the 10 best books of the year by the New York Times. It's out now in paperback. Jane Mayer, welcome back.
Great to be with you.
Well, the reclusive hedge fund billionaire behind the Trump presidency is Robert Mercer. In The New Yorker this week, you have the first in-depth report on this mystery man and his daughter, Rebecca. That's Rebecca with a K. To do this story, you spoke with the Prince of Darkness himself, Stephen Bannon. What was that like? And what did he tell you about Robert Mercer and his daughter, Rebecca?
Well, I was really on the edge of my seat to see what Bannon was like, and pacing around and waiting for him to call, and finally he did. And, you know, he turns out to be quite engaging and a lot of fun to talk to. I mean, I guess we should have predicted this, because really somebody who's gotten ahead the way he has to have some pretty good skills. Anyway, he's a lot of fun to talk to. He's interesting. He said about the Mercers that they had launched the Trump revolution and that they had, more than any other donor in the last 4 years, had the biggest impact of anyone in putting Trump in power. So He was pretty out front about the whole thing.
So you say Bannon was a lot of fun to talk to. Is Robert Mercer a lot of fun to talk to?
Robert Mercer wouldn't speak with me, and that's not unusual. He doesn't speak almost to anyone. He actually, I quote someone, he said to a colleague at some point where he works at an incredibly lucrative hedge fund in Long Island, and he said that he prefers the company of cats to humans. So he's a very terse speaker when he speaks at all.
You say he heads an incredibly lucrative hedge fund. Who exactly is Robert Mercer, and how rich is he?
He is the co-CEO, with one other man, of something called Renaissance Technologies. It's a hedge fund, as I said, in Long Island, and it's hard to know exactly how rich he is, but he is listed by Institutional Investor as making approximately $135 million a year, and that would have been true at least for the last 10 years or so. So he's getting up there in the billionaire category, I would think, but he's also a pretty big spender. For someone who never speaks and has this kind of austere exterior, he's been described as having the sort of the personality of an icy cold poker player by the one person that did interview him, Sebastian Mallaby, who wrote a book called More Money Than God about hedge funds. But anyway, for someone like that, he has some pretty high-flying spending habits, even if he's not speaking. You get the feeling is that Robert Mercer, who grew up quite middle class, hit it really big when he went to this hedge fund, and it wasn't until he was in his 40s. And it enabled him and his family to pretty much indulge any kind of material whim they had. And all of them went off in different directions on incredible scales of shopping sprees. And one of the things that he wanted to buy, and that his middle daughter, Rebecca, wanted to buy, was an America that more closely fitted their political point of view. So they poured money into that project.
Let's talk about that political project. You say Robert Mercer basically never speaks. Nevertheless, you were able to find out quite a lot about his political ideas. I just want to ask you about a couple of these. What does Robert Mercer say about racism in the United States?
This was the challenge, really, of doing this piece, cracking the code of who he is and what he believes in. And finally, I got lucky because one of the people who's worked in his firm for the last 20 years finally got angry at him for the way he's trying to influence American politics, and they had a big fight. And it's opened up a little bit of a glimpse into what Mercer really believes. And among the things that he believes are that white racism doesn't exist in America. He says there is no white racism, there's only black racism. And he says that the civil rights movement has made blacks less well off than before the Civil Rights Movement. He thinks that the Civil Rights Act was one of the great mistakes in modern American history.
What does he say about the dangers of nuclear war?
He got into an argument with somebody he worked with in which he argued that Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nuclear war in general were not as bad as people think. It's survivable, he argues, and not only that, but the radiation from it, he suggests, from the fallout is good for people. So he'd say, while in the blast zone it wasn't so great for the Japanese, he was arguing outside of the blast zone, he would claim it was great for the Japanese health, which is just a position that has been there's just no scientific support from it, at least from conventional scientific authorities. I spoke to the Association for the Advancement of Science, and they said no, there is no such support for this.
They said no. and you have a let's call it a fascinating story about what he says about the value of cats.
He has, according to his colleagues, a theory of humans, which is that they have no inherent value, that a human being is only worth as much as they can earn. So he would argue, for instance, and has, that he earns, 2 million times or thousands of times more than a school teacher. So that makes him that much more valuable. And that school teachers are marginally valuable. People on welfare, he suggests, have no value. They have negative value. And then he argues, though, that cats have value because watching them provides pleasure to people, unlike people. So it's a very we're sort of mocking him, but Bob Mercer is a brilliant computer scientist who figured out a way to use computers to kind of game the stock market and commodities markets worldwide and figure out how to build predictive models so that his firm would know where the markets are going and be able to trade on it in advance. And they've just plain minted money ever since that. So he's brilliant at the things he's brilliant at, science and computer science and math, but he has really strange and almost absent human skills. I mean, people say that he can't look at you when you're in conversation with him. And it's painful for him, it seems, almost to have to converse. So he's an odd mixture of things.
Robert Mercer is reclusive, but his daughter Rebecca does not seem to be. You report that she lives in a $28 million apartment at Trump Place on Manhattan's Upper West Side. You report that she homeschools her children and that she's, quote, consumed by politics. You say Trump has embraced her in a big way. Why exactly is that?
Well, because the Mercers embraced Trump in a big way. And it didn't happen until Ted Cruz fell apart as a candidate. First, they were backing Cruz, but when his campaign went down, and many other conservatives were saying, we're not going to back Donald Trump, the Mercers leapt right on board with him. They look at him as a vessel, and not necessarily the best vessel, just the only one they could find, because they just can't stand the Clintons. And it's beyond the normal level that some people have. Bob Mercer has told at least 3 people who I interviewed, and one of them's quoted about it on the record in the story, that he thinks that the Clintons are murderers. He thinks they've actually had their opponents killed. In a way, you can see similarities between him and Trump in that they both are susceptible to conspiracy theories, and their information flow is from kind of dubious sources often. And the result are these opinions that are, unconventional in the extreme.
And Rebecca, let's talk about Rebecca, what should we call her?
The public Mercer. Yeah, so she is really an activist and outspoken, at least within Republican circles. Again, she didn't give me an interview, and she doesn't give interviews either. The Mercers disdain the media and have tried to build up their own. They are the principal owners of Breitbart News. So Rebecca is, she's hard driving. She is impatient. She's a graduate of Stanford. She's very bright, and she has a graduate degree from Stanford too. She worked for a little while in her father's firm as a trader, and then went on, got married to a partner on Wall Street and they had these 4 kids that she homeschools now. But at any rate, she helped pour a lot of money, family money, into backing Romney in 2012. And when he didn't win, she was said to be incensed and kind of took matters into her own hands, turned on sort of the political consultants and the pollsters, and decided that they didn't know what they were doing and that she would build up her own operation. And that's when the Mercers really stepped up and started becoming a force in American politics.
So this is an important element of your story. The Mercers fund candidates, but that's not the only part of their political spending. The other part is equally significant. What should we call it? The organizational and ideological apparatus. Let's talk about that.
Since 2008, between 2008 and 2016, they put $77 million into American politics, and a lot of that went into building up a few organizations. One, they put $10 million into Breitbart News, which became a force on the right of sort of this economic nationalism of the type that Bannon has been pushing, and that Trump's been pushing. And it's also been very closely associated with the alt-right and kind of tips over every now and then into kind of white supremacism and anti-Semitism and some of the other pretty unpleasant isms. Then they also built up their own data company. It's a political data analytics company called Cambridge Analytica, which is kind of like a propaganda machine almost. It claims to have a tremendous amount of information on American voters, something like 2,000 points of data on 220 million individual Americans. And with that data, it's able to send out social media messages that are sort of targeted to people to try to push them politically in a direction. And then they built up, among the other things that's been very important in the last campaign, they founded an organization called the Government Accountability Institute. And it produced the book Clinton Cash, which really went a long ways towards defining Hillary Clinton as corrupt. So it was the playbook, in a way, for how Trump and the other Republicans took on Hillary Clinton came out of that book and that organization, which was funded by the Mercers.